and just want to welcome everyone again to this quarter's NASEO Buildings Committee webinar titled Achieving Energy Savings Through Smart Surfaces. We're excited to be back on track and having some quarterly convenings. Our last time convening way back in November, which is Q4 of last year. So glad to be seeing everybody again. Today's webinar is a highlight on the Smart Surfaces Coalition, which is an organization represented by Bill Updike today, and we'll be hearing a lot more from Bill later on about the various resources and efforts that the Smart Surfaces Coalition engages in to advance smart surfaces adoption. But before all that very exciting stuff, NASEO will also take this chance to provide a few program updates as well as flag some events and upcoming resources to be aware of. So with that, as the first item of our agenda, we'll turn it over to this slide first to kind of highlight some of our recent and upcoming events. More recently, we held a NASEO NARUC Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings Working Group webinar that my colleague Rodney can elaborate more on, but the resources can be found on our web pages, and potentially one of my colleagues can drop those links later in the chat. And then we want to also flag a few upcoming events. All of these can be found on our events page, which I've listed on the slide here in a hyperlink, and all these slides will be made available after this call, so folks will be able to click on anything here. But wanted to just post here a few upcoming events to be aware of, which include a national rebates update call that my colleague Maddie can elaborate on. We have our monthly Washington update call coming up, and that's open to all NASEO members, state and affiliates. We also wanted to highlight the upcoming annual Better Buildings, Better Plants Summit through DOE. There are hotel rooms open for that. The registration is now formally open. That'll be happening in person April 30th through May 2nd in DC at the Capitol Hilton Hotel. It's a very robust agenda every year, and I believe there are 6 tracks on various building and industrial topics, so might be of interest, and they're definitely interested in getting more public sector representatives in attendance, so please feel free to register if that's of interest. Also wanting to flag our upcoming NASEO regional meetings, which are always a great way to get together in person with a lot of your neighbor states and regionally based affiliates. And those locations are being confirmed as we speak. So the NASEO events page has more details on that. And then finally, I think this is cut off a bit, so apologies for that. But we'll also be having a NASEO National Buildings Summit. More information to come, but that'll be based in Arlington, Virginia, where the NASEO office is, and is planned for September 8th through 9th. So just keep that as a hold on your calendar, and you'll, as members of the Buildings Committee, be receiving more information on that. All right, so with that, I do also want to give my colleagues a chance to provide a few programmatic updates spanning topics related to the building grid edge technology space and building energy codes, residential buildings as they relate to various existing federal programs, and any other miscellaneous pieces that might not neatly fall under those buckets. So if I can call on maybe Rodney, since he's off mute already, to provide some updates on demand flex topics.
Sure. And yeah, thanks, Jasmine, and glad to be here with the committee today. Actually, that item that's up there is the main thing. We had a pretty good webinar back on January 30th. This is under the umbrella of the NASEO NARUC Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings Working Group, which focuses on sort of the grid edge, virtual power plants, distributed energy resources, and related stuff. We had a representative from Octopus Energy Group discussing their company and their sister company, Kraken Technologies, Is a retail provider in parts of Texas where it offers demand flexibility rates and incentives that enable virtual power plants. They draw a lot on their experience in the UK and elsewhere doing that sort of stuff, where they manage flexible assets such as residential batteries, smart thermostats, heat pump optimization, EVs, and EV charging, doing managed charging. Their Kraken Technologies division is a software firm essentially that offers to utilities and I think also to aggregators the ability to do demand flexibility. So it's sort of a DERMS, if you're in this area, DER management system to coordinate end use equipment as well as on the utility side of the meter, front of the meter kind of flexible assets as well. So that's the main thing. We do provide the working group and put on our GEB website updates to various updates of events and reports and those sorts of things. I'll highlight to you that there was a New York grid flexibility potential study done by Brattle. There is our friends at SEPA did a state policy snapshots on virtual power plants and DERs. And then there are a number of Department of Energy and a series of Lawrence Berkeley lab reports related to demand flexibility, virtual power plants, and DERs. And I'll add that we do endeavor to work across our programs here at NASEO. Excuse me. In fact, I think it was just last week or earlier, last week or the week before, we had one of our occasional periodic meetings between the electricity program and the buildings program to make sure that we complement each other in our activities. And I babbled on enough, so thank you.
Thanks so much, Rodney. Can I call on Maddie to provide a few updates on the residential side?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I just wanted to take a moment to share with everyone a copy of the letter that NASEO submitted to DOE back on February 28th. I'm going to drop it in the chat. But this is a letter of suggestions of ways that the Department of Energy could streamline the home energy rebate programs. I think we were up to 30 in the letter that we submitted. But wanted to let everybody know that the final version was completed and we got that in. And thanks to everybody on the call that provided us with feedback in order to create these suggestions. We're feeling optimistic, I think, that the Department of Energy is taking seriously our suggestions. So really thankful to everybody who stayed in touch with us in order to put this list together. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. It's on the NASEO website, but feel free to reach out to me or anyone at NASEO if you've got any follow-up questions. And that's it for me.
Thanks so much, Maddie. And lastly, I'll toss things over to Liepa for some codes update.
Hi everyone, I'm Liepa. So on the codes front, we're moving forward with the planning process for the two RECI 2 projects that NASEO is the prime recipient on, which include the project on state collaboration related to codes and a project on a resilient energy code field study in Arizona and Florida. And in addition, we do have Smart Services Coalition on the line. So I wanted to also mention we are developing a short primer on smart services and how they relate to codes, which will be published later this year. And I'll pass it back to Jasmine.
Thanks, Liepa. And just to add a few finer details on our work in the existing building space, we continue to work in a one-on-one capacity with a lot of states to kind of understand their priority building sectors. Our recent Buildings Committee convening also highlighted a resource on K-12 schools, and we're kind of developing a series of follow-on case studies to see all those recommendations at work and on the ground. So do stay tuned for that. If you've attended any of our past in-person meetings, you may have also heard about our program in a box offerings, and those span a lot of buildings, financing, transportation, topics across the building, across the NASEO portfolio. So a lot of our buildings work is also being built out in that format. So those are just a few of the things that NASEO is working on. So hopefully a good rapid fire snapshot before we dive into the kind of meat of today's presentation. So with that, I will stop sharing and pass things over to Blake Shalide from the Oregon Department of Energy, who will be moderating for us today. What do you, Blake?
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine, and thanks to the NASEO team for those updates. Really, really helpful. As mentioned, I'm Blake Shalide. I'm the manager of the Codes and Standards section at the Oregon Department of Energy, and really excited to hear later on what Bill's got to say about achieving energy savings through smart services. But before that, I'll just talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing here in Oregon. Our vision at the Oregon Department of Energy is leading Oregon to a safe, equitable, clean, and sustainable energy future. And I think smart services definitely have a role to play there with helping us achieve that vision and helping us with our mission of helping Oregon and Oregonians to make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system, advancing solutions to shape an equitable, clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and to responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. So just a few things that we've had going on recently in Oregon to address what seem to be kind of increasingly warm days and hotter summers. We recently conducted a cooling needs study, and this was largely a result and something that came out of an weather event that we had in 2021. We had a heat dome that posed substantial risks to human health with record-setting temperatures in Oregon of 116 degrees, which is really, really unheard of. And we've generally had warmer summers most recently and since then. And that particular heat dome resulted in more than 100 estimated deaths statewide, with 69 confirmed deaths in Multnomah County alone, which is where our largest city of Portland is located. Many of those heat-related deaths occurred in people's homes, and there's also a large spike in heat-related emergency room visits and all-cause mortality associated with the event. And that heat dome wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Temperatures are increasing across the U.S. and globally due to climate change, and heat waves will continue to be a more frequent occurrence, posing continued risk to human health. We think that the prevailing historical trend and projection for the foreseeable future is an increase in the average temperatures across Oregon and across the U.S. And here in Oregon, heat waves lasting more than a day or two have been a significant public health crisis. Oregon's historical mean for summer days with the heat index over 90 degrees is 13 days per year, but by mid-century, the statewide average number of days over 90s projected to range from 25 to 48 days per year. So we're seeing a pretty significant projected increase there, with average summertime maximum temperatures that are currently around just under 80 degrees at 79 degrees are predicted to increase by somewhere between 5 and 7.5 degrees in the future. So here in Oregon, we've got a few statewide extreme heat mitigation strategies that are part of ongoing policy and planning. I mentioned we conducted a cooling needs study. We've had some programs to help provide more cooling through the form of heat pumps in residences. We've increased cooling centers through some funding to provide cooling centers for folks that don't have access to cooling during these extreme heat events. We're implementing a number of activities around grid resilience, community renewable energy projects, home energy scoring, implementing some of the other cooling and heat pump incentive programs. We've got a building performance standard program. And then, of course, we are pretty active in our statewide energy code implementation and development and support. So with that, I'll introduce Bill Updike, who's the program manager for the Smart Surfaces Coalition. Bill's been working on energy and climate sustainability issues in both the private and public sectors for more than 25 years. Before joining the Smart Surfaces Coalition, he served as the principal with the consulting firm Integral Group, where he completed numerous climate action plans for cities and zero carbon campus plans for colleges and universities. Before that, he was the chief of Green Building and Climate branch of Washington, D.C.'s Department of Energy and Environment, responsible for green building and climate policies and programs for the city. He's also worked as a project manager for renewable energy companies, a green building construction manager for a design build firm, and as an environmental journalist for 2 national magazines. And he's won multiple awards, including the inaugural Bold Award for U.S. Green Building Council in 2015 and the Living Building Challenge Hero Award from the International Living Future Institute, also in 2015. So definitely a wealth of experience and expertise that Bill offers, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about smart surfaces. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
And thanks, Blake, and thanks to you all for allowing me to join in this conversation. I'm really looking forward to the conversation and exploring what we all might be able to do together. Thumbs up if the slides are up on the screen. Excellent. So Smart Services Coalition is a coalition of more than 40 organizations that are focused around mitigating extreme heat and stormwater flooding in urban areas to drive resilience and a healthier, cooler, and safer environment for folks in those cities. NASEO is actually a founding member of the coalition and is participating in our current nationwide project, which I'll talk a little bit about. So one of the things I wanted to talk with you all about is this idea of sort of thinking outside of the box of the building. It's getting increasingly difficult to find cost-effective energy savings with, increased levels of efficiency beyond what's already in the code, and in terms of some of the, energy efficiency equipment and widgets in the buildings. As you all know, it's sort of getting more and more difficult to find those cost-effective solutions. So part of what I want to talk about is this idea of expanding beyond what is inside of buildings and thinking about what is, the rooftops, the walls, and the adjacent areas around the buildings, but then also citywide, and the impact that urban heat island has on energy consumption and peak demand in particular. So just this idea of sort of thinking a little bit outside the box being the building in this context. So what are smart surfaces? Most of this is not rocket science. These are things that have been around for a long time and regular parlance, but we're talking about cool surfaces. We're talking about green infrastructure. We work on permeable paving surfaces, energy generating surfaces, as well as focused around low and negative embodied carbon and materials, in particular in concrete. Our CEO just helped launch the new Carbon Star program for embodied carbon in concrete. So think of that sort of as the Energy Star version of embodied carbon. So that just got launched a couple months ago. But part of our premise is around integrated thinking for these strategies, instead of just thinking of one technology, thinking about them so that you can deliver an integrated strategy that is the most cost-effective and impactful for people in these urban areas. I think we all know this collectively. Temperatures are increasing. You heard some of what Blake was talking about in Oregon. A lot of the increases are actually going to happen in the middle part of the country, areas that aren't used to having extreme heat. The largest and worst mortality event in terms of extreme heat, at least in terms of the ways that it's recorded, happened in Chicago some years ago, where many hundreds of people died from an extreme heat event there in Chicago, and were caught unawares a little bit. And we're going to be seeing more of those increases, including potential for more than 70 consecutive days over 100 degrees in parts of the American South. So on top of that, we're also going to be seeing increases in flooding through most of the country. And the nice thing about a lot of the work that we do is it helps to address both urban heat island, extreme heat, and also stormwater-based flooding, and so you get this sort of multiple benefits out of single interventions, which is a nice thing. So I know you all know about the urban heat island effect, but our modeling is showing, in particular, areas in cities that have been historically disinvested, structurally disinvested for many years, can be upwards of 15 to 20 degrees hotter than cooler parts of the city and surrounding rural areas. And so there is a disproportionate distribution of extreme heat in cities, and this is something that we're really focused on addressing as well. So we launched in the summer of 2023 a major project that built on some early modeling work that was done in Philly and Baltimore, DC, El Paso, and Stockton. But we launched a more major and comprehensive effort with 10 metro areas around the country. These metro areas that are listed in green here. NASEO is one of our project partners on this effort, which we're calling the Cities for Smart Surfaces Project. And it's an effort really to help these cities to transform their surface infrastructure to, address climate, address extreme heat, and address stormwater flooding. On the project, we have 15 funded project partners. So it's 10 metro areas, 15 funded project partners. It's a large scale effort across 5 working groups. We've got a data working group. So we're working on, and I'll talk a little bit about this, benefit cost analysis tool. We have a geospatial tool we built and some other tools as well. And doing some advanced micrometeorological modeling in all 10 metro areas, which is yielding some really interesting data and results in other research. We've got a community engagement working group, so we're doing some direct investments with churches and community-based organizations to implement smart surface related projects. We have a federal funding working group, which has gotten more interesting over the last month or so, but we are still moving forward with grant applications for those programs that are remaining intact, at least as we know of now. But we've seen some great success with the cities we've been working with. Over the past 2 years, there's been about $1 billion of grants that have significant amount of smart surfaces in them. Some of those are on hold right now, and so unclear how they're going to shake out. But certainly saw some good success in the last administration, and hoping to still see some in this administration. We've got a policy working group, so these organizations that are listed here. So we're helping provide information and education to the cities around drafting of ordinances and legislation and mayor's orders and codes and other things like that for the cities. And then we've got a health working group with American Public Health Association, American Lung Association, and the Harvard School of Public Health. Harvard's doing some really interesting novel research, mining 911 and Medicaid and Medicare data around extreme heat in particular. And then we're working to translate that research into economic analysis that gets then put into our benefit cost analysis model and the tool that we build from that. So it's a large scale project, across many metro areas, 9 states, and 15 funded project partners. And it builds on some success that we've worked on in Baltimore, did some benefit cost analysis modeling for Baltimore, yielded overall sort of a 10-to-1 benefit cost ratio, upwards of 5 degrees Fahrenheit peak summer temperature reduction citywide, and much larger reductions in specific neighborhoods that are urban heat island areas of extreme heat, billions of dollars in net financial benefits. And this economic argument, this financial argument, has led to now more than 6 pieces of legislation in Baltimore just in the last 2 to 3 years. So it's been convincing enough for them to move forward on a lot of different measures. They passed a cool roof requirement. They're doing urban meadows, a bunch of work on trees, looking into building a climate resilience authority, kind of a quasi-public entity for financing resilience projects in Baltimore. So a lot of really exciting stuff happening in Baltimore. Energy specific wise, there are great benefits to smart surface interventions from an energy efficiency perspective. And this is part of the sort of, thinking outside the box pitch. I'm sure many of you know many of these data points already, but, cool roofs lead to anywhere, 11 to 27% peak cooling reductions. The research shows, which can be around 3 to 4% total energy reductions depending on climate zone and building type and age. Some studies showed that if you retrofitted 80% of commercial buildings in the US, it would yield a net annual energy cost savings of around $735 million, and certainly a lot of carbon dioxide equivalent reductions as well. There's a lot of more research on cool walls now than existed before, and the Cool Roof Rating Council now has a cool wall program where they're manufacturers getting products certified for cool walls. And one of the interesting thing about cool walls is because of lower insulation levels and because of how much surface area there is, the impact on energy savings can be equivalent and sometimes even higher than energy savings and cost savings from cool roofs. And so there's a lot of really good and interesting research that's been developed in the last 5 years on cool walls. And it's exciting to see the Cool Roof Rating Council taking that up and showing some success there. Green roofs, similar story in terms of savings, though the interesting thing about green roofs is it can, in addition to providing cooling benefits, there are also some insulative benefits on the heating season side. And so there's an interesting pitch for green roofs. And over time, given the length of time that they last, they can be cost effective. There's a first cost impact of green roofs, but over time that can be quite helpful from an energy perspective and also just generally cost effective for other reasons, in particular in those cities that have stormwater regulations and requirements. Strategic placement of trees can yield spectacular savings, upwards of 25% for residential buildings if they're strategically placed in the right locations. And this is something that is an area of interest that, in terms of the energy modeling world, there are folks that are starting to think more about tree placement and strategic tree placement in terms of energy modeling, which I think is pretty intriguing. There's a new sort of growth in technology around passive radiative cooling films and coatings. This is a little bit more rocket science-y, but not that much of that. But essentially, what these films and coatings are doing and panels is reflecting solar energy across different parts of the spectrum, in particular, this part of the spectrum that's called sort of the atmospheric window part of the spectrum, which allows these films and coatings and panels to reflect solar energy essentially back out into cool space, to the point where if you have these surfaces in areas like a ramada in a park or some bus stop or something like that, the temperature actually, the ambient air temperature can actually be lower under these surfaces than the general ambient air temperature around them, which is hard to get your head around, but it's measured and it works. And these and certain applications, the panelization that's happening with these films being connected to HVAC equipment, in particular for buildings that are heavily cooling dominant and or have cooling equipment like grocery stores, for example, are showing upwards of 40% energy savings when they're connecting to those systems. And in some of those building types, the energy savings can be 2x, 3x what PV is per unit area. So it's a really interesting and growing field. One of the film manufacturers, 3M, is leaning into this, and we're told going to kind of go big out into the market in this calendar year. So this is something to keep an eye on for sure. And then combined surfaces, when you combine a cool roof with solar, it can increase the solar panel efficiency by upwards of 10%, which, would lead to something like 3 to 4% additional energy output. Same thing or similar things with solar and green roofs, increase the efficiency of solar panels. So thinking about these things in an integrated fashion to deliver the most cost-effective outcomes. In addition to the energy efficiency story, we think one of the most compelling pieces of smart surfaces related to energy is the potential for peak demand reduction. Our modeling shows we can double the solar reflectance of cities if this work is done sort of at a city scale. We can, like I said, in Baltimore, the modeling showed upwards of 5 degrees temperature reduction citywide, and then double digits in some neighborhoods in the city. So huge potential for temperature reductions, and research shows that each 1 degree C of temperature increases peak electricity demand up to 4.6% and total electricity consumption of up to 8.5% for every 1 C. So if we are able to, at the city scale, deploy enough smart surfaces to reduce temperatures by 5 degrees, and then in some neighborhoods, like I said, 10 degrees plus, there's the potential to reduce peak by 10 to 15% citywide, and total electricity consumption upwards of 20-25%. And so we're talking about grand scale surface infrastructure transformations here when we're talking about these numbers, but we have to kind of start somewhere, and the numbers are compelling enough and cost effective enough to make this happen. So we built 3 major tools as part of the cities project. We have a decision support tool, which is a geospatial tool that has a bunch of inputs where you can do, I think the most powerful thing about this tool is you can do a query where you can search for all different types of demographic data, heat data, flooding data. You can look at energy burden percentages. You can look at income data. And you can query and layer all of those inputs to then figure out, what the census tracts are that sort of pop up when you overlay all of those different inputs that you're interested in for a specific project deployment. Now, it's quite powerful, and the cities are already using this. We're actually been using it for federal grant applications for visualizations and other purposes, but some of the cities are using this tool for developing their plans, their resilience plans and climate plans, and for other kind of project planning purposes. So this tool is in beta form right now, as well as our benefit cost analysis tool. So backing this up, we have like a massive economic spreadsheet model, but in order to make it more accessible to like an average city policymaker or a citizen that is interested in this space, we built a very user-friendly web tool where you can select the different sort of surface intervention types, cool roofs or green roofs, or all of them. And the tool will calculate essentially what the financial impacts are, as well as the potential for peak temperature reduction and carbon emission reductions and stormwater, gallons of stormwater mitigated and other metrics like that. And it can be sliced and diced in different ways. And, you can turn on and off the different interventions to see what the benefits are. But using this tool for planning and policy purposes, but also, we've been using some of this data for federal grant applications. And the cool thing about both of those first two tools is that we now have data that is, deeply science driven with the micrometeorological modeling for those 10 metro areas, which represent about 35 million people or a tenth of the US population. And we're now able to see both at a micro scale on a per square foot basis or a per tree basis what the economics are, what the air pollution mitigation potential is, and then other metrics as well. But then also at a macro scale, we now have bundled data across those 10 metro areas, 35 million people, 840 municipalities, in a way that didn't exist before. And so we're really learning some interesting things just from a national perspective as well, which has been really, really cool to see. And then our third major tool is this Smart Surfaces Policy Tracker. We have more than 2,000 policies in our database related to smart surfaces and the work that we're trying to do. This tool is sort of in the early phase, but we have 9 states in the tool right now and policies and cities in 9 states. But we're adding another couple thousand policies for the other 41 states over the course of the next 2 to 3 months, and we'll have all 50 states represented by this summer. And so this tool is already available publicly, but will be getting updated and more expansive before sometime before July. So that is a quick summary of our project. I'd love to chat with you all about it and anything else that you might be interested in discussing. Thanks so much again for letting me take the time and talk your ear off there a little bit.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bill. That was really informative. I'll first see if there's any questions from anyone in the audience. I know I've got a couple questions myself, but
maybe I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
So, Bill, what are some example policies either at local level or state level? And of course, we're NASEO, so we focus on states, but most of the pertinent rules and policies and regulations and ordinances are going to be local. But is this mainly zoning or codes or what kind of stuff?
Yeah, a combination of those things. We're getting a fair bit of traction on cool roof codes. In some ways it's sort of the lowest hanging fruit because TPO white roofing is now the lowest first cost, roofing material for low slope roofs by a fair bit. And so the market's sort of moving that direction anyway. The national code has a relatively low threshold for what the solar reflectance requirement is. And so some of the cities are posing a higher threshold because it's cost effective, even on a first cost basis, but very cost effective on an energy savings and life cycle basis. And so some are doing that as well as adding cool roof code requirement for steep slope roofs. And that's, I think, an innovation there. Outside of California, there's only like a handful of jurisdictions that have cool roof requirements for steep slope roofs. So we're getting a lot of traction there on the code front. We are working on a template mayor's order that we're hoping some of the mayors will implement related to public buildings and public infrastructure. And it's across the suite of all of those kind of smart surfaces that I mentioned earlier. So there's some interest in mayor's orders as well. On the state level and nationally, I actually submitted a proposal to ASHRAE to extend the cool roof code requirement to climate zones 4 and 5. It unfortunately did not make it out of the subcommittee, the envelope committee. There are, if you look at the work of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, there are significant energy savings through climate zones 4 and 5, and even in some climate zones that are, even in 6 and in some other places. And so I think it's inevitable. We know temperatures are increasing, and on a first cost basis, these materials are lower cost anyway. And so, and there's energy cost savings to be had. So it's a little tough that it didn't pass, given all of those things. But we all know how hard it is to change the national codes, in particular with industry capture, happening with some of the code processes and other things like that. I'm working on a couple of federal pieces of legislation. One would be to create an incentive for cool roofs for steep slope roofs, as well as those very highly solar reflectant materials, meaning some of those like passive radiative cooling films and panel technologies that I mentioned before, things that are, of solar reflectance over 90%. So that's something that's in discussion. Also working on a federal bill around cool pavements, cool pavement coatings, doing a national study. Right now, it's a little bit of the Wild West in the cool pavement world. The cities don't know exactly who to trust in terms of the manufacturers, and there needs to be a third party that really weighs in on a federal level there to do some analysis on the benefits that are being claimed. So that's something on a federal level as well. We're getting connected through NASEO to some of the state energy offices to have conversations around codes and other potential policy interventions at the state level. But there's a whole suite of potential interventions that are being discussed in the cities between code and legislation. It's kind of in a lot of different places, a lot of legislation around trees and other things like that, and green infrastructure as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Bill. I'm glad to hear your involvement with some of the national model codes like ASHRAE 90.1 and maybe the IECC as well, because typically if something goes into the model code at the national level, it makes it a whole lot easier to find its way into local city and state jurisdictional codes too. So good to hear
we've unfortunately failed at IECC as well with that code proposal.
Yeah.
But there is a conversation that started now about the idea of doing something maybe related to the energy credit structure for ASHRAE. And so that might be approached to start to normalize the idea, in particular in climate zones 4 and 5, and then maybe down the road try to get it more into the mandatory section. So that's an approach we're looking into now.
Thanks. Well, we do have a comment or question from Lisa Gartland, who's also with the Oregon Department of Energy, in the chat, and I'll read it out loud too. You can probably read it too, but Lisa's interested in the reflective emissive films and a couple things. How much do they cost compared to cool coatings? And from what you can tell, they tend to be shiny, which means that they could create a hard glaring reflection like a mirror, as opposed to a more diffuse reflectivity that you get from cool coatings. And has that been an issue anywhere that you've seen?
Yeah, those are great questions. There's nothing like fully in the market yet, so we're not exactly sure on costs, but we've kind of heard some target target goals of around like 70 cents a square foot for the coating technologies. So yeah, so it's, a cool roof coating might be somewhere on the order of like 50 cents a square foot. So it's going to be more than that, but the gains are greater as well. And from a life cycle perspective, I think the numbers will look good economically for these technologies. But it's we don't know yet because they're not really in the market fully yet. So we'll have to wait and see on that front. In terms of the glare issue, they've actually done a pretty good job of resolving this. The early films were very kind of mirror-like and shiny, like you said. But they're now on like generation 4 or 5, and they sort of almost look a little bit like uh, cool roof materials, although they don't get soiled like a cool roof material would because they don't, they're just more, I don't know the right way to say it, less porous, I guess, or less have less of an impact in terms of soiling. Not that they don't ever not need to be cleaned, but that that soiling just isn't. It's not a thing that is more permanent, which can sometimes happen if you don't stay on top of the cool roof films and other technology. So yeah, so they've done a lot to adjust for that, and the coatings are as well are they don't have the glare issues that some of the early examples of this technology had. And yeah, I see the question on the same question on the durability, weathering, soiling. Yeah, they've done advanced weathering analysis of the, I don't know about the coatings, but the film, the passive radiative cooling film, they've been doing stress testing and all that work around durability, and the numbers look pretty good on that front as well. I mean, similar to what you might see on a single ply, roofing material. Now, these aren't going to be replacing the actual, roof membrane in terms of the waterproofing part, at least not at this stage. So these would be things that would be coated on top, or the films might be adhered, or in the case of one company, there's a company called SkyCool, which is using the 3M film in a panelization structure where they're connecting the panels to HVAC equipment and thermal water loops to provide that cooling benefit, for different building types, and so that's more of a panelized structure. But yeah, they're seeing some good testing, though I think more kind of needs to be done on that front as well.
Great, thanks. One of the questions that I had as you were kind of going through it, and I think you spoke to it a little bit, but we're all state energy offices, and I was just kind of wondering, like, what state energy offices should be thinking about most for like how to dedicate what are our limited staff and resources to thinking about these issues and cool surfaces, and then the interaction between like the work that we do with energy offices and buildings and maybe some of the other state agencies that also have a role with infrastructure and other cool services that maybe we don't touch, but we can have some sort of like interaction and collaboration with. So if you have any recommendations there for what we should be focusing on and prioritizing.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously direct energy benefits, and then there's indirect energy benefits. And, some of what we're talking about here are indirect energy benefits. And it's totally, a challenge, right? I used to work for the city government in Washington, D.C., and that interagency collaboration, so essential for infrastructure transformations, working with state departments of transportation, other sort of, water agencies, other public works types agencies. I mean, ideally in the sort of dream world, we would get past some of these silos, because that's what we need to do to provide real resilience, in the most cost-effective way. And so, my dream would be like the state energy office and the state Department of Transportation collectively go together for a federal grant application to address smart surfaces on buildings and around buildings. And they both get to take credit for, the benefits that the multiplicative benefits that those infrastructure transformations lead to, right? Or even sort of setting policy, collectively together. That's part of what we're trying to do with these mayor's orders, is bring together like transportation policy and energy policy, climate policy, so that, these interventions, they have so many, you get $1 of investment that gives you, $20 in benefits instead of a 1-to-1 ratio, right? And just trying to build some of those bridges between agencies is really radically transformative. I always say that one of the most powerful things that happened when we did the sustainable DC plan in the city was that we then had a point of contact in every agency that was focused on implementing the sustainability plan that we could go to, and we'd have monthly meetings. And it just broke down all these barriers. It broke down all those silos, and it just made us more cost effective, in terms of tax dollars, and more effective in terms of, impacting positively people's health and otherwise. And it's not easy. I don't have like an easy sort of panacea type answer for you, but ultimately it needs to happen if we're really going to address the climate crisis and deliver resilience for our citizens,
Yeah, thanks. I think that's helpful to help kind of shape just like our thinking around the subject a little bit, and how we might interact
totally.
and collaborate with some of our state agency partners. I think the last question that I had was just around some of the tools that you spoke about a little bit, between the decision support tool, the benefit cost analysis tool. It seems like some of those are kind of still in development, and I was kind of wondering like if and when there might be some kind of like training, or if there's any resources on the website around that, like if a state agency wanted to pick that up and try to use it. Is it pretty like self-explanatory, or is there kind of a need to understand some of the inputs and assumptions that go into it?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be happy those tools are in beta form right now. So with the caveat that they're in beta form, we'd be happy through NASEO to do some trainings on the tools to any of the state energy offices that are interested in them. So that could be a great follow-up to this conversation. And Sandy and Grace and others could help us get organized on that and make that happen. We'd love to do that. And then, of course, when they get to, the 1.0 and 2.0 versions so 1.0 will be this summer, and then the final kind of 2.0 versions of the tools will be at the end of this calendar year. Then, they'll make them fully available to you all and others as well, publicly available. But yeah, happy to, in the meantime, do some, set up a training, just kind of walk through them. They're pretty user friendly, but the benefit cost analysis tool is super easy. The decision support tool is quite easy, but it's probably helpful to kind of walk people through how that gets used.
Great. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're kind of nearing our time, so I might turn it back over to Jasmine and NASEO if there's any closing remarks. I guess last chance for any questions too for Bill.
Seeing none, thanks so much, Blake, for moderating, and Bill for all this great information. As I think we alluded to, just with your willingness to kind of facilitate trainings and follow-up conversations. I think we want this to be an ongoing dialogue. So if any of this resonated or feels applicable to some of the goals that you have at your energy office, absolutely be in touch. NASEO is a collaborator with the Smart Surfaces Coalition on this cities-oriented project, and obviously wants to make all these resources available to our state members as well. So the NASEO team is here to facilitate. But with that, thank you all so much for your attention. Thank you again, Bill and Blake, for this wonderful panel. And we hope to see you next quarter, and we'll be in touch in the meantime. Thanks again and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.